Hello, Brian. How are you?
Hey, Margie, I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
We're doing okay. Getting through this special period here in April 2020.
Yes, it sure is special. I'm sure a lot of folks that are going to be watching this might concur with that statement. Special. It's definitely special.
Well, it's special, it's unusual, and hopefully it will be a one of a kind.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll be over
Okay.
soon.
Yeah. So anyway, it's really good to talk with you again. I know that when we spoke about a month ago, things were not looking too good in the country and even around the world. So here we are in April and 4 or 5 months into the coronavirus worldwide. And unfortunately, since we last spoke, there have been many more confirmed cases in the United States, and unfortunately, over 23,000 deaths as of this morning. But states are doing as best they can. Many of it issued stay-at-home orders and social distancing. People are really observing that by and large around the country, and it's making a big difference. On the other side, more than 17 million have filed unemployment claims over the last month or so. That's obviously very difficult for a lot of people.
Hmm.
On the good news side, the Congress has appropriated more than $2 trillion. President has signed it into law over 3 different emergency spending bills, and it covers quite a bit in terms of scientific research and support for key economic sectors, small business especially. I know a lot of your clients are in the small business category and some nonprofits as well.
Hmm.
There's direct financial support to Americans. A lot of funds and checks are getting deposited this week and over the next couple of weeks. And it includes boosts to the social safety net programs. A lot of states are talking about how they're going to move forward in terms of reopening the economy when health conditions warrant making those decisions. So we're all looking forward to that next
Indeed.
phase.
Indeed.
So some of the things that you and I have been talking about, especially for people in small business, how is your company going to get through this, and what will things look like when you get back on your feet, when companies get back on their feet, people get back to work, and what is the vision of the company at that point? We have to get through it, of course, and there are goals for achieving that resilience. What we're going to talk about today is both from a communications perspective and a business perspective, how you assemble, put together a crisis management strategy, which includes communication strategy. And as we know, we have to communicate with a lot of different people. Our stakeholders are multiple. We have, suppliers, we have employees, we have lenders, the community at large. And so it's a complex set of actors in the communications field and in society at large. So when we talk about how we're going to communicate with our stakeholders, we're going to look at what can we really do that has a material specific quality to it. So in communications terms, we talk about setting communications objectives, and they are specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, and they're time bounded, meaning that they have a time element. There's a time frame, a calendar or sorts that you want to try to stay within and try to meet. Just throw out a few examples of some objectives, and the ones we're really going to concentrate here on are the outcomes. There's output objectives. So for example, you can have webinars, you can have conference calls with your internal, your external stakeholders. You can issue a lot of press releases and do media interviews, and all that's called output. But you really have to stop and ask, are they effective? And which are the ones that are most effective? You can talk about the process objectives. Well, we're informing people, we're educating people. And that's all very important because that's how you get to your outcomes. And the essential elements of an outcome objective are: what audience are you trying to reach? What behavior do you want to influence? For example, opinions or awareness or support. By how much do you want that to change? And how long should it take? How long do you want to devote to getting to that outcome? So in order to have a sense of where you're going, you want to know where you've been and do some prior research on what different stakeholders think, what they feel, what their concerns are, and try to establish some targets of where you want to be in the next week, in the next month, over the next 6 months, and that type of thing. Now, I know that you have also used the same acronym SMART for your crisis management plan, where you've adopted terms like you want to sustain and mitigate, take some action, build resilience, and transcend where we are. So I wanted to just turn it over to you for a minute or so, how you see incorporating those terms and those concepts into managing the crisis.
Right. So, a lot of clients are familiar with the SMART acronym specifically for goal setting. And what I wanted to do was really try to give something that we were familiar with in the business community and really make that applicable to crisis management. So the biggest thing right now, the number one thing that my clients are working through is how do we sustain our business? How do we make sure that we have the resources, which, for most businesses are human capital that we have. So our employees, our key stakeholders, the equipment and the fixed resources that we have as assets, our financial capital, and then what are we doing with our time to manage that? So how we combine all of those resources together. And as we've seen it going into this crisis, the crisis can impact different aspects of that depending on the business that you're in. A lot of businesses that are involved in manufacturing right now, their supply chains have been cut because of the ties to the Asian markets. And once those went down, they weren't really able to go out and get the component parts necessary to create that manufacturing and create their products. So the question right now for a lot of businesses is, okay, how do I sustain where we're at? How do we do that? And of course, the Congressional, the CARES Act, that is a first attempt with 2.3 trillion, and that can be levered up to about $4.5 trillion of total input into the market. So the question is, how do we take some of those resources? How do we take the resources that we have in our businesses or our organizations and apply that? So part one is, you got to come into this and say, where are we in terms of a real sense? What's the reality of the situation? Don't look at things with rose-colored glasses, because frankly, we just don't know how long this is going to last. So first part is, let's be in business. Let's keep ourselves going. Second step is, from a risk mitigation standpoint, what are the things that we know about and that we can plan for? How do we focus on those risks that we can go out there and actually see? And then ultimately, getting through a crisis, any crisis really has to do with actions. So everybody that's on the team, if you keep yourself moving forward, even if it's just incrementally, we know we're making progress towards a goal. And then resilience in the largest sense is really just learning from what happens. It's about creating smart systems, and you get out in the marketplace, and especially in an environment like this where we don't know whether the crisis is going to last 2 weeks, 2 months, or a year. And so understanding how to take the lessons learned and then apply them back into the processes that we create. And then the last is the ability to transcend. So occasionally, I'm working in my office here, and I've got my dog here, which is extremely unusual. But occasionally I've got to actually get out and do something different to change the scenery up a little bit, and take a look around and say, okay, when I want to get through this, where is it that we want to take our business? And so we talk about vision and those sorts of things, which really touches on why PR is so important, because it gets down to communications. It gets down to that ability to get out into the marketplace and not only keep the people that we're working with, our stakeholders, informed, but to a certain extent, it helps us too, as leaders, to get out and say, okay, this too shall pass. And when it does, where is it that we want to be? So to me, those are kind of the core messages. And when we couple them with the other aspect of this, which is goal setting, which is the other SMART acronym that we've already mentioned during this presentation, the ability to get through a crisis with specific goals, I think allows us, when we do finally come out of this, to hopefully get back on track and achieve our visions and goals.
Wow. Obviously, there's a lot involved. Just get up every day and have a plan that is part of a bigger strategy. Okay, so some of the same buzzwords that you just talked about, our vision, our goals, Just generally speaking, you're in business, a company or even a small nonprofit, you want to provide the best product or the best service at the fair price. I know that with a lot of this market disruptions, that might be a challenge for some companies who might have to pay higher for their supplies, but nevertheless, it's part of the reality, and we need to understand that the vision has to surmount the reality. In terms of your goal, you want to rebuild your base, expand your base while outlasting the pandemic. And so we want to talk about combining both the crisis management and the communication. A couple things that you mentioned that I'm going to talk about as well. When you talk about action, it's not just the words in our messaging, it's our deeds. It's what we do, because words only go so far. You want to be able to show something that people can remember, that, you know, my employer did X, Y, or Z, and this really helped. Or also I want to mention the idea of opening up the suggestion box, and I think that I have here down at the bottom. I think as business owners, many people feel like the weight of the whole world is on their shoulders. And perhaps 90% of it is, but there are people in your organization who have ideas, who are asking the same questions as you. So it's important to be open to the suggestion box, and that actually gives people a chance to buy in to the joint future that they're creating with you. And I think that's really important, to give people hope. They have a mission to help sustain and transcend. So just a couple of off the top of my head ideas of things that I know people are doing right now. Companies are adjusting policies like telework. They're changing their schedules. They may have half the workforce one day and half the next, just to keep people coming in or working from home, of course. Adding a delivery service where maybe you didn't have that before, and using all the various communications tools that we have. But I've also noticed that more and more employees, employers, and state governments are starting to mandate things to help keep their employees safe, such as mandating and providing masks, wearing the protective gloves, washing your hands, providing those sanitizers, making sure people work at a 6 feet distance, staying home if they're sick, calling the doctor, and facilitating testing. I've read a lot of stories where different people are going into stores, they're not protected, the employees are not protected, and that just creates a petri dish for spread, even though it is improving in a lot of places. We want companies to provide, and employees want to receive these protective items. And then on the financial side, there's a lot of things that people have questions about. Can they get loans? What is their health insurance going to cover? Do they need to file for unemployment? Can they pay their rent or their mortgage? What kind of childcare are they going to need to have if they go back to work outside their home or even inside the home? And another thing that is apparent through this crisis is that there are a lot of people whose jobs do not lend themselves to online working at home. And that might be a function of the skills they have and their education level. And to be able to have a different type of employment future, they might need some new training. And there may be opportunities in funding from the CARES Act or other low-cost educational opportunities in their community and online, where they can improve their skills to help them get out of the situation they're in and be better prepared for the next time. And I think that's something we all need to think about, is raising our skill, the skill of our labor force, and facilitating. There are many people who have not completed their high school degree, high school diploma. They need English improvement. All those things are very important for economic viability. So I just want to put that out there on things that employees can all be interested in, can take advantage of. For your customers, many of the same things, but they want to know what's happening in your business besides providing protective gear for when they walk in your business. They want to know what, in terms of the changes that you might be making in their business, Are they going to be offering more online delivery, for example, online purchasing? But make sure that the customer knows what your delivery time frame is, because we've gotten so used to the same day or next day delivery. It doesn't always work in a lot of businesses. So we want to solve the problem, not just sell our way through it. And one of the things that I've learned from some of the other public relations activities I've been involved in, that advertising is very important in this period where we're all staying at home a lot. We're watching a lot of TV or listening to a lot of online, radio. The advertising has to be appropriate to the situation we're in. So make sure that the ads are serious, they're compassionate, that they resonate with people. Don't make jokes that don't apply, that might be even offensive. Instead of doing the door-to-door, knock on the door, as I've had some people come to my house over the last few weeks, knocking on the door to sell things, that to me seems like a big no-no. So think about how that comes across if you're in a sales type position, setting up a suggestion box, and of course, reaching out to the media. And I'm going to devote a couple of minutes later on in terms of dealing with news media of all sorts. Do you have any comments at the moment for what I've covered? Because I can continue.
Well, not really. It's interesting. I mean, communications is so important. And I'll just say this up front. Communicating often and then having that routine. I mean, we've talked about this a lot. Just you and I talking back and forth about creating that sense of routine for people that are important to the organization. So I just love this, and these are all fantastic ideas about how to mix it up. So I'm just looking forward to seeing more on specific things that some of our clients or people that are going to be watching this can actually put into place today to make a difference with the communities they serve.
Okay. Well, I did go to one of the leading advertising public relations publications online called Adweek, and I pulled out a couple of really good examples of appropriate advertising. And this is just a short excerpt from Frito-Lay Brands, which manufactures a lot of different food items. Their latest slogan is that it's not about brands, it's about people. And they're taking steps to make sure that their employees have benefits. They're actually donating nutritious meals to many different communities around the company. Frito-Lay has even donated mobile health units. And to me, I think that's just fantastic. We tend to think of Frito-Lay as a lot of junk foods, and perhaps it is, but they're also doing some things on the health side, which is really, I think, going to be impactful. Jiffy Lube, I saw an ad that their slogan is "Your safety is our top priority," but it's more than a slogan, really, because I've seen that they are taking all the customer service safety measures with gloves and masks and safe distances. They're also offering discounts to people in medical field, police, fire, and first responders. And those, again, are welcome steps that the company shows that they care. Another important thing for any company that has a website, and many of them do now, right? You need to put up a statement to your customers that explains how you're protecting your employees, all the measures we covered earlier, how your service or your product might be affected, any changes, and how much time might be taking now as opposed to in the past. So if you don't have a message on your website to that effect, you can go to smartjobs.com and take a look at some of the language they have there suggesting for your website. Another group of your stakeholders, of course, very important, are your lenders and your donors. And again, we're seeing a lot of businesses are trying to access the funding through the Small Business Administration. They have 68 district offices around the country, and they have a lot of great information on their website. They also have information on how to draw upon the Paycheck Protection Act. You need to fill in all the information on the employees in your company. I've read also that the independent community banks are being very flexible and responsive to loan requests from business, and maybe even more so than some of the bigger banks because of the volume of applications they have to process. And the things that they'll want to know, why you need the funding, all the details you'll need to fill in on the paperwork, the actions you're taking to help your employees, and how you're reaching out to your customers and clients to show that you are really dedicated to be remaining a viable enterprise.
So quick comment on that before we get too far down the road. If people are thinking about getting out and getting a Paycheck Protection loan and doing that, there's a limited amount of funding. And I say limited, I think the initial tranche was $250 billion, and they are going through that extremely quickly. So if people are watching this and they think that they might qualify for one of these loans, I highly recommend getting out there and getting the application in so that you don't get caught in a situation where they've run out of funding, and even though they're thinking about putting another bill through Congress, since that one hasn't been passed and we don't know what the parameters of that are going to be, probably better to get in line now and try to get that loan funded if it's possible to do so.
That's a good point, and I know that working with the private sector, that is probably the number one concern. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good.
You're good.
I'm sure if my sound was still working with the earphones. Okay, so I'll just encourage people to take Brian's advice very seriously. Okay, many of the same questions really apply to contacts with your suppliers, and you need to find out what their situation is, see if there's flexibility. Do you need other sources? And one thing that we saw over the last few weeks that a lot of companies, entrepreneurs, and those that are even more established, were trying to adapt what they're doing to fit the healthcare market. So these are just some basic steps that you're probably already doing, but you want to identify what type of adaptation can you make? What supplies, materials you're going to need? Do you have the manufacturing capability, the engineering staff, the workforce readiness? Do people have skills to make that transition? Figure out when to get started, how long will it take you to get up and running, and will it be delivered in time? And of course, capital. What kind of capital are you going to need? This is an idea that we're seeing a lot of now, especially in the textile industry, collaboration with competitors. We're also seeing it in the technology and IT industry with a lot of the bigger, well-known company names. But if you're going to be collaborating, you also want to look at who can do what best, right? What are your strengths? What are their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats? To see where you can join forces. And again, look at the market, look at the supplies, et cetera, that you have to do in any enterprise. But there may be some great opportunities to not just do great business, but repair relationships and establish new relationships. And that's what keeps us going. So I'm going to spend a few slides here the next few minutes talking about communications, and in particular communications with the news media and media in general. First, I want to start by a little definition. What is the media? Who is the media? So depending on what age you are, what generation you grew up in, you might be more attentive to traditional media, local newspapers, national TV networks, international news, radio, TV, print, morning newspapers delivered to your front step or your mailbox or magazines. The thing that really distinguishes our democracies is that anybody can publish or comment. And so it's not just the reporter, but it could be the person who writes the op-ed or the editorial director of a news organization. There's a term that came into being when the internet became commercialized 25 years ago, really, called new media. Well, new media is not new anymore. It's all the internet. It's revolutionized everything. Everything's immediate. The deadlines are rolling. There is no such thing as a 4 p.m. filing deadline anymore. News can break and be disseminated any time of day. We also have to be aware of the downside. There is always misinformation. Misinformation is when something is inaccurate. Disinformation is a more willful distortion of information. Propaganda is even worse. And then we have this new term, fake news. So whatever you want to call it, the rapidity with which information could come out is also vulnerable to inaccurate or misleading information. So it's very easy to take one piece of news, so to speak, and think it's true. And that's particularly the case with what we see on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, maybe not so much on LinkedIn, but other social media apps. And what you want to do when you're planning your media outreach is to understand which media contacts, which reporters, for example, are using what app. You find Twitter is a very important source for reporters. It's really just a teaser, though, because to get your story out, you generally have to either talk to them or do an email or an interview. So it's just the superficial to get their attention. These are true regardless of what tool you are using to communicate, internally or externally. You want to make sure you use a trusted messenger. It's usually the people at the top of the organization, and that includes your communication team. People need to be working together to have consistent and serious messaging and be able to answer the tough questions honestly. And those are things you need to think about and talk about ahead of time so you're not surprised and you come across as honest and also knowledgeable. We want to avoid jargon, try to use plain English. If you have a high level of non-English speakers in your workplace, for example, you also want to make sure that they're getting the same information as everybody else. It's important to stay current. If we don't know the answer, just say you will find out and be able to follow through on that. There's nothing worse than saying, I'll let you know, and never letting anybody know. Be accessible. It's hard to be accessible when the bad news is not favorable, but it's really important to be open to people and use a variety of tools to disseminate your information, because not everybody uses the same tools to find out what's going on. Just on a slightly different perspective here, there's a very prominent public relations company called Edelman, and they've been around for many years. They conducted an international survey in early March of people in 10 countries, Europe, number of countries in Europe, a number of countries in Asia, South Africa, and in the United States. It covered 10,000 people, so that's a hefty survey group. And this was all focused on communications and trust. Where do people get their information most? Who do they mostly rely on? And some very interesting statistics have come out of that research. It also covered the important role of the private sector. So here's some top level statistics from the Trust Barometer. These are worldwide statistics unless I've indicated United States. 70% of the people around the world are following, or at least 70% of the people in those 10 countries are following the coronavirus news at least once a day. So people are paying attention. It's almost as high in the United States when they took the survey, 61%. 74%, however, say that there's a lot of fake news and false information. So people are skeptical. They're not just taking what they hear and accepting it as true. even higher percentage, 85%, really want to hear from the scientists and the doctors, because that's where the expertise really is. On the other hand, people do say, 45% are saying that it's difficult to find reliable and trustworthy information. And about half, a little more than half, are concerned that people are trying to make the situation worse or talking about it in terms that sound worse for political gain. Another interesting thing about the survey is, where are people getting their information from? Where are they turning to? So they divided the survey group into 3 age groups: 18 to 34, the young adults, the middle age group, 35 to 54, and 55 and above. And of the 3 groups surveyed, the young adults were the most likely to turn to social media for coronavirus information. But frankly, it's about even with those turning to major media. Very little difference, 54% versus 56% going to major media. So it's pretty much 50-50, despite what we might assume. People in the middle tend to go, excuse me, more for the major news organizations, and the older generation, 55 and above, almost, that's 3 to 1, relying on major news organizations, and less so on social media. And that's a reflection of a variety of factors, either their interest in social media or the reliability factor. It's hard to know why, but it's a combination of both. Spokespeople, this is really goes to the heart of what information you're absorbing or being presented with. The most trusted spokespeople in terms of the survey group were scientists and personal doctors, over 80%, slightly less, 75%, 72% from the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control, then a little bit less in the online medical community, 54% from their employer, 51% from their country's leader. Remember, we're talking about 10 different countries here. And least trustworthy was journalists at 43%. And you can interpret that however you wish, but the media is different in every country. So I think that one would have to explore that number a little bit further. But basically speaking here, you see the scientists and the doctors are held in the highest regard. So the believability of the information, 40 to 50% of the people say that they'll believe it if the information comes from employers, the government websites, health websites, or traditional media, if they see that information just once or twice. 35% said they would never believe the information if it only appeared on social media, and very low. So it shows you that it's a suspect tool. The 3 main takeaways I have on that were that people don't rely only on social media. They turn to the scientists and health experts mostly, and they also rank their employers very high. In fact, that was the most trusted conduit for information. So that's why it's very important for any business to have a good, honest communication, open communication process with their employees. These are things that people expected out of business, and I thought this was really important. Again, emphasis on employers being better prepared than the government to respond. And in this survey group of 10 countries, people in South Korea rated their employer in their country the highest of any of the 10 countries that participated, highest in terms of preparedness. In our country, the United States, 51% said the business was better prepared than the country overall. 69% believe that the employers are responsible for taking action. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier, about providing the gloves, providing the flexibility in telework, and the types of things that keep your employees safe, looking after their welfare also. trying to maintain the employment. It's very important here that government and business work together as a team. I think we're seeing that in a lot of places. And 76% believe that business must act to protect employees and the local community. And many also thought that employee safety was more critical than business impact. Of course, without the employees, how are you going to run your business? It becomes more challenging if they're not able to work. And globally, just the emphasis on employee relations. Regular open communication is important everywhere. So just a summary of the key findings from their research. Business and government have to partner to respond effectively. It's important to take steps to protect the employees, their customers, and the community. Communicate trustworthy information daily, or at least on a very regular basis. And leverage scientists and other authoritative spokespeople. So I thought those were really good takeaways from the research. It's all available online at the Edelman website as well. So just to look towards the evaluation of where we are in this period of the coronavirus, you're trying to sustain your business and be resilient and transition and come out on the other side. It's important again to understand where did you start, both in terms of your business practices, your business situation, and knowing what your audience think, what they're concerned about. Seeing where you did well, where you did not so well. Are you achieving what you're trying to achieve? And what adjustments did you make? What would you change moving forward? And just to keep an analytical mind on moving forward. So I just wanted to thank you, Brian, for okay.
Well, you cut out a little bit there, Margie, but I just wanted to say thanks for assembling the presentation. Yeah, I know it's probably cutting out just a little bit at this point, but so at any rate, I want to thank you for putting together the presentation, Margie. That was an absolutely fantastic overview of kind of the state of things from a communications perspective, and from the standpoint of just looking at overall business. This is a time really where I think if we look at sustainment, and communications is a big part of sustainment. I think most of the businesses that I'm working with are focused on, okay, where is it that I want to be positioned when all of this is over with? And it's a great opportunity to shore up things, and the communications plan, I think, is a fantastic part of that. So thanks for putting this together, Margie. I look forward to doing it again with you.
Well, thank you very much. And I just want to remind people to continue to follow the good hygiene rules. And even after this pandemic is over, continue to wash your hands and cover your mouth when you sneeze and cough. So take care, and we'll talk soon.